Hey, welcome to the Doc Analyzes Anything, where psychology and science meet, and we try to explain any and all human behavior, including pretending to be a character from a movie or a game during everyday activities.
I don't know that I've done that in my adult life, but I do remember like The Matrix came out. I don't know what year that was. I was probably like 6th or 7th grade, and my cousin and I were just like running through the parking lot. There's a huge parking lot back behind a strip mall, going to this restaurant. We're like running full speed, acting like we're in the movie. And so I can see that at a certain age, but at some point it gets a little weird, I think.
That movie came out at a good time where, I mean, that's who I wanted to be, for sure.
I remember playing too much Splinter Cell back in the day, and then I would be walking somewhere, see a light bulb, and want to click
it out.
Yeah.
Yes. No, the
Yeah.
Neo, I was definitely Neo in my head, I think, a few times, where it's just like looking around, seeing deja vu and being like,
Yeah.
Oh man, like
Now,
they got me.
is this thinking of that? And we always joke around like learning science is kind of like the red pill versus the blue pill. Like, would you take it, do you think? Because I would, just because understanding how things works is more reinforcing, but it's also kind of sad at the same time. You lose all the mysticism in the world as you learn more about how things really work. Like the fall and Halloween just isn't as spooky as it used to be once you learn like what's actually going on, you know?
I mean that I think there's an appeal to like willful ignorance too. And just like, no, like things are fine. Like why muck it up?
So it's like what's his name that took the deal with the robots to go back and be entered back in the matrix by turning everybody in.
Oh yeah. I went out.
Cypher, wasn't it Cypher?
I think
Yeah.
it's right. I think it's right. Man, we gotta go back and
I can just remember her, damn you, Cypher, as he unplugs her.
Sticking with the movie portion, it reminds me of, you remember the ending credits of Men in Black, how they pan out and all of a sudden it's aliens playing marbles with the universe?
Yes.
I don't know that I would want to know that that's the case.
I think I probably would, just to think there's at least something more out there somewhere. But I will say, going back again to the red pill versus blue pill, we're kind of like trapping Chad in and not giving him the option. Like, no, you're going to learn this shit regardless of whether you want to. So just think of it that way too.
Which pill was the knowledge pill?
That's why I've been talking generalities. I don't remember which one was which.
I don't either. Well, welcome to our Matrix podcast, where we talk about how great all three movies were. All three equally great.
The second one wasn't bad, but you can't do that well with the first one and expect it to live up. So before I jump in, we'll say today we're going to be talking about how there's no such thing as ingenuity or invention. So just to keep you around, a little bit of a bait there, but you'll kind of hopefully get where I'm coming from with that here in a little bit. I'm Dr. Steven Sparks. With me always, at least most of the time always, my co-host Kyle Sturry, and this time we have with us again Chad. I'm sitting in a dark room like I always do. It says Chad Ever. I think everybody's gonna see that now. It's Chad Hartung, depending on which Facebook he's hiding behind this day. So
I keep hearing a different last name and seeing one, and I haven't asked any questions. Is this something that's supposed to be public knowledge, or do I have to edit this part out?
No, you're totally good. So my middle name is Ever, and growing up and even into some of my young adult life, a lot of people had trouble pronouncing my last name Hartung. And so when I became my business and my brand, which is Ever Studios, I just kind of sync the two together. So Chad Ever, easy to remember, easy to spell, identifiable. So it's more of a brand than anything.
Do you want to give what is the origin of the Ever?
Yeah, so I was adopted from Colombia when I was 2 and brought to America, and my original first name was Ever, and so my parents moved it to my middle name and gave me my first, and obviously I inherited the surname.
I'm thinking if they wanted you to be like a podcast reality star or something, they should have just kept Ever. Like that sounds like something that would have been relevant now, even though back in the 80s they would have been like, that's a weird name. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I've always wondered, and I ended up finding out that that wasn't the case, but I always wondered if like my parents truly had an issue with me going by Chad Ever. But you know, I already my dad uses his middle name also. So I mean it's been shifted around, but turns out there's a little bit of a why are you doing this? And then once they learned that it wasn't like shame driven, that they're like, okay, that makes logical sense.
I ask my kids why they're doing what they're doing pretty much like every day now. It's like, why is there sand in the blender? That was a real one the other day.
So they used to go, but why? And now you're saying, but why?
I'm saying, but why? Yeah.
Yeah. Sand is a horrible thing. I think now that we have kids, my wife is really realizing how much I don't like going to the beach, not because I don't enjoy the beach, but just the sand. I can't stand the sand. And so we've gotten to the point now where there's so much, playing in the sand in the backyard that she just uses like a little handheld vacuum at night to vacuum their hair off so they can go to bed and not get sand everywhere. So
yeah, there's not a good way to deal with that sand.
It's the glitter of nature and it's horrible.
Nature's glitter.
Yeah.
Going back to middle names, my Amish grandparents did not believe in middle names, so nobody really has a middle name. My dad has no middle name, so I was the first generation of middle names, maybe, in my family.
How has that changed your life? Do you think you've had a better experience because you have a middle name?
I'm probably more easily recognizable compared to other Kyle Sturries who have a different middle name.
I bet there's a lot of those, huh?
It's a very common name, right?
Do you think it really just helped them yell at you more sternly by having a middle name to add in there?
Well, my middle name's Landon, and it's a very I don't know, Kyle is a very like kind of dorky name. I feel like if you were born in 85, that's just what your name was.
I don't know if that's true, because now like Kyle's more like the Monster Energy, I'm gonna ride my bike off this cliff type thing than it is
well, you're in luck because next episode
are you gonna keep the tradition going and have middle names for your little munchkins?
They do have middle names. They have very kind of hippie middle names though, because my wife is way cooler than I am.
All right, we're gonna run out of time, so let's I guess actually get into this conversation since
back to the Matrix.
He needs to go get a haircut here. So just warning everybody, this one's gonna be a little more science heavy, but hopefully we're gonna talk about it in a way that's accessible to everyone, and that's why Chad is here to be like, hey, you guys are talking in circles. I don't understand what the hell you're saying. So let's get at it.
Do it.
So talking about invention, new behavior that's new to humans or society, in our field and in science in general, we usually refer to it as novel. So when you hear us talking about novel behavior here, just because I'm probably not going to be able to not talk about it in terms of novel behavior, that is what we mean. Is just something that is new either to the individual or to the species. And for this topic, to really talk about how behavior comes about that's never been seen in the species before, we're not going to talk about that stuff that's really just novel to the individual, but something that's never been done before. How would that come to be, especially when previously we've talked about all behavior is based on a history of reinforcement? You know what I mean? Like if behavior only occurs because it's been reinforced, then how do you get new behavior is kind of the idea here. So
like actions come about because of the history of reinforcement. But if I do something completely new that somebody has never done before, that could be used as an argument against the theory of reinforcement because you're doing something that would have never been reinforced.
Correct. Yeah. And so we'll kind of get into that, and I'm not going to go too deep of a dive in there because it could spend hours describing many, many different topics on this. I wrote a paper on this that I'm going to be sending out to get published hopefully here pretty soon. And it's very sciencey that I don't even know if a lot of people in our field are going to take the time to read it. And so we won't go that deep into it, but maybe later people are like, let's go deep.
We'll read your paper.
I already forced you to read it. And Chad wouldn't probably understand half of what I said if he read it. So this is the translation. So again, when we're talking about novel behavior here, it could mean a few different things, but we are only talking about truly unique to our species as a whole, such as invention or new language or something like that. Before we jump in too far, let's do a quick discussion on generalization. I know we brought it up in the past. I gave the synopsis of the Gutman-Kalish 1956 experiment, I think a couple episodes ago, but basically stimulus generalization, when some environmental event or condition is similar enough to those that normally accompany a single behavior, that they are also going to likely cause that behavior to occur, even though that there's something slightly different. And so basically, the more similar the environment is to that in which a behavior normally occurs, the more likely it will be to occur in that new environment. That's just, somewhat different.
So if I'm with my mom and I learn to say please and thank you with my mom, if I start seeing a teacher or another big person in a different setting, I might also say please and thank you in front of that person.
Yeah, and with the Gutman and Kalish experiment, it really was where they first determined it was a gradient effect, which means the more similar it is, the more likely it's going to occur, and it'll be occurring less and less depending on how much it differs. And so it's funny, I think back in the 30s, just kind of like on a whim, Skinner talked about that effect in a letter to one of his colleagues, yet it wasn't until 1956 of this experiment that it was actually shown to work the way it does. So that experiment, they taught pigeons to peck a key or a disc during in the presence of a certain color, and they talk about color in terms of frequency because different colors are different light frequencies. We'll talk about it in terms of color, but just if you try to read that article, you're gonna be like, what are they talking about with these numbers here? So let's assume, because it's the middle of the spectrum, they taught the pigeon to respond in the presence of the color green. And then they took away the reinforcement and they started seeing if they present different colors, how much will the pigeon peck? And what they found is, the closer the color was, so yellow or blue, they got more pecking than with red or violet that were farther away down the spectrum from those original colors. And so as farther the colors, or the more the colors differed from that original training, the less pecking they got, but they still got this gradient effect as it decreased as they went away from the original.
Okay, so I'm following, believe it or not. So equate that to a scenario that I have. So, because mine is human, not animal. So a scenario.
You don't peck very often.
I try not to. If I do, it's in private.
The often. Wow.
I heard it right as I said it.
That right there is why we invite Chad to join us, because we know something like that is coming up. The amount of pecking I do when my hands are full and I need to push a button on my phone though, and I can't quite reach it, that actually happens quite a bit. So
what was your scenario?
Yeah, so let's say somebody was not born, maybe not raised, but was immersed in Southern culture.
Most people are born, by the way.
Not born and not raised, but immersed into Southern culture. So let's say they went to school in Georgia for 4 years and they adapted, y'all, yes ma'am, yes sir. And then they moved back to an area where that's not prominent. Would the expectation be, because they're not surrounded by that same environment, that that would eventually die off because they're not surrounded by it? Or is that something that would be like almost embedded in them from that time going forward?
It's a great question.
So I'll give another example of the same sort of thing in a moment, but what you see often or usually is that does tend to decrease, and your behavior seems to naturally assimilate to those around you. And then as soon as you're back in that original situation, that original environment, it comes back pretty strong, pretty quickly, and much faster than it would be than if you move to the new environment that it takes for your behavior to change. So I know, like when I'd go spend a week in Kentucky with my cousins, I'd start picking up things, and my parents would laugh at it because, you know, I would have never been caught saying y'all before I spent a week down there, sort of thing. But that goes away quickly when I come back home, versus if you have someone that moves to a new area, it probably takes some time, but as soon as they're back home, that probably comes back in very quickly.
Before you do your example, so how about accents? And I have actually a real world example of this. So would accents then be chalked up as behavior? I'll give you an example. So my wife, she's from the South, and she lives up here and has for years. When she talks to her mom, her accent gets thicker. And then it slowly dies off over the next either few hours or day. But it tends to like come really, really rich during those conversations and even a little bit after.
So I think what you're really pointing to, and if you remember last time you were here with us, we really got into those different variables that will affect behavior in any given time. In the Gutman-Kausch experiment, the color green was a discriminative stimulus, or SD, or a stimulus in the presence of which behavior would be reinforced. I would assume the fact that she's talking to her mom would be an SD, in which talking that way is more likely to be reinforced, compared to people in Michigan, here in Metro Detroit, where you're probably not getting weird reactions, but you know, and again, this is all without having to actually think and stop and think about it. So when I say, you know, I don't mean that your wife is actually considering this as she talks, but the likelihood of getting a strange look or someone commenting on your language being different here is much higher than being on the phone with her mom. And so this would almost be an S delta, or maybe even an SD for punishment, because it can be probably pretty annoying to have everybody be like, yeah, y'all, and like kind of making fun of your accent when you're saying it, even though probably not enough to even really stick with you. It's enough to shape your behavior depending on who your audience is.
Yeah, that's interesting. So if you get like negative reinforcement from having an accent, you might diminish it faster than if you're getting positive or positive attention, where you may keep it.
And I'm going to call you out here. You're close with that. Negative reinforcement would be the removal of an aversive condition. And although we're talking about that being punishing, what I think it would really be is avoidance, which is very similar to that negative reinforcement, where instead of it being there and you're getting rid of it, you're trying to prevent it from occurring in the first place. And so
that makes sense.
I have to specify that, because every time someone says negative reinforcement and wrong, like, I don't know, the devil gets its wings or something. I think I'm confusing a few different things there. But
it's that classic Christmas movie.
Right. So yeah, going back to the discriminative stimuli, green, let's talk about there's several different stimuli then in the environment. I was actually talking to a friend of ours, Marty, the other day, and he asked if I did an episode yet on him because he's so crazy, in his words, not mine. And so we'll use Marty here as an example. He's one of our last single friends, and he also has a tendency to get a lot of attention for his horrible dating experiences and choices in general. So I used the example before of, struck out when you're watching baseball on the screen, and someone says, oh yeah, and just horrible dating experience. Let's imagine Marty's going up to the bar. You see him get shut down. He's just trying to order a drink, but tries to talk to the girl sitting there as he's doing it, and she just turns away, doesn't talk to him, whatever. There's a lot of different responses or behaviors that you can exhibit in that moment. You could say the word snubbed, rejected, struck out, blown off, shut down, spurned. If you want to sound smart and fancy, you might say rebuffed. Those are all fairly interchangeable. Those are all examples of response generalization, where multiple responses can kind of fit into different situations. And so we'll give a little bit more of a definition. Response generalization is, and by the way, you may have just heard it, response and behavior are used interchangeably in our field, and it has more to do with the context and the way you're using it than it actually has to do with any difference in meaning. But it's when two or more behaviors often occur in the same situation or very similar situations, and they're not really necessarily interchangeable, but they're likely to occur in place of one another because of they're falling into the same response class is what we would say. So they often occur same situations or close in time or have some other variable that overlaps between the two. And it can be a whole set of different behaviors that, like I just mentioned, all these different ones can all kind of fit in there. And so in that example, depending on the situation and what the discriminative stimulus is, if it's Marty and we just see him, you know, strike out like that and he's walking back like giggling to himself, its head hung like, oh, you guys just saw me, you know, and we're like much more likely to say something like boom, rejected, you know what I mean, like really give it to him. But if you're with a friend who's either a little more sensitive or somebody you don't know quite as well and you see them trying to just be friendly and they turn their back, that could, you know, really be punished if you use that. And so it's kind of a gradient, not necessarily in terms of the value or power as much as also, you know, what is selected based on what is appropriate in that situation too.
A very like real example that I'm thinking of too is like how far away my children are at the playground when I need them to come home. So if they're right beside me, my response isn't going to be super loud. I'm just going to say, come here. But as they get further away, same function. I'm trying to get them to come home for dinner or whatever, but I might just differentiate how loud I expel my voice without looking like a crazy person on the playground.
It's probably nothing you can do about that, but yeah. There's also another form of response generalization. It kind of falls into the category as well, but I like to refer to it kind of as response or behavior stray or contingency stray, where the behavior itself slowly starts to change or break down, and as long as it functions the same way, it achieves the same reinforcement, then the new form of behavior is likely to occur. And most of the time we see this in kind of putting less effort into the response. It takes less effort, but it's still achieving reinforcement. But sometimes it can just change over time too. So staying with like the language example, think about the term cell phone. You know, when cell phones were new, it was always talking about a cell phone or cellular phone, so people knew what it was. Then over time, it got a little more lax. It was cell phone, and then just cell, or sometimes even celly. And using that word is still going to be reinforced by the verbal community around you, even though the form of that behavior has changed due to generalization over time. And so functionally, it works the same way. There's actually some overlap in the actual words themselves, but they are not the same behavior technically between cellular phone and cell. Also, real quick, we'll talk about multiple control, and that's just in general the idea of multiple things controlling any individual behavior at any given time. And so there's two types of multiple control. Convergent multiple control is when two or more stimuli affect a single behavior at any given time. Much like you're in the situation where you said strike out and it's baseball on the TV and your friend talking about their love life converge to create that response of struck out. And then divergent multiple control is when two or more behaviors or responses are controlled by the same stimulus. Just like you can have any of those different responses in response, all those different behaviors in response to your friend talking about their love life. I hate when I use the word response back to back like that. It bothers me.
We all noticed.
I'm sure you all did, because I heard it, and I would have heard it when someone else said it too, and it would have bothered me when they did it as well. So this idea that basically every stimulus in your environment can be affecting your behavior without you even maybe noticing it. Like I just glanced up, saw a Mark Twain book on my wall, and maybe that'll affect what utterance comes next compared to if I would have seen the zombie apocalypse guidebook or something like that. And it can also be affecting many different behaviors, all the stimuli, many different behaviors at the same time, and a potentially endless number, because our verbal behavior gives us access to things that we haven't even experienced before.
And what a lot of people call this like subconsciously doing things, like I subconsciously like engaged in this or I did that because, I don't know why, it just happened.
Yeah, I think we've talked about before contingency control, where the behavioral contingency controls our behavior without even having that internal dialogue or that internal verbal behavior. It's telling the rule to myself. I always use the example, and I'm sure I have before on this, for like when you're first learning to drive, you have to tell yourself the rules. All right, 10 and 2, look over my shoulder, check the mirrors, slow down for the stop sign. Then nowadays, you don't even remember your drive home half the time because it's just become contingency control. It's become automatic. People would say that you did it subconsciously, but really it just doesn't have the need for that verbal behavior involvement anymore.
Right.
So sticking with the language side of things first, Skinner discussed in his book Verbal Behavior, stimulus generalization likely leads to things, new words such as slurp or swish. And so in that example, he's talking basically the sound that those actions make is probably where the words describing them came about. Like you're swishing, it makes kind of a swishing noise as you're swishing liquid around in your mouth. Likely it was someone trying to imitate that sound, and to label that is where that came from. Same thing with slurping. And that would be the stimulus generalization. You're generalizing the stimuli of the sound to another sound, and that becomes the word. Similarly, I need a drink of water. That didn't come out very well at all.
Blah, 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 blah.
Like whoosh.
Yeah. Saying a body part fell asleep is likely came about because there are common stimuli between sleeping and the lack of blood flow to your hand or foot, not being able to feel it, the tingly feeling. He hypothesized that going from one to the other, that overlap of stimuli is what led to us referring to that being asleep, because it's not like your foot can literally fall asleep like we would. Response generalization can lead to a new language too. It's going to describe how the word taunt likely came from a combination of the words haunt and teases to create this new word. I don't know that we would use the word haunts like they did back in those days either, but it's still interesting to think of how that could have come to be. I feel like there's a lot of like, oh, yeah, my old haunts. Like, you look at someone like, wait, what does that mean again nowadays?
But that combo sounds a lot better than heeses.
But it could have been, and that probably would have sounded just fine to us if it was. Something a little more, a little bit more current, although it's not as popular as it was just 5-10 years ago. But the idea of everybody calling their significant other their boo probably came from someone hearing the French term beau, which beau, which means love, and then either poorly translated to bo, which then shifted to boo or boo over the time, or someone just saying beau, seeing it written and mispronouncing it as beau, and then it becomes this English slang term for love that gets way overused and drives everybody nuts, and then disappears for the most part 10-15 years later.
Are the kids still saying boo?
I hear it every once in a while, but I think that was more of our generation or the generation between type thing. I'm not sure.
The Gen Y.
I have to say, I pay so little attention to popular culture that I don't actually know if it's used or not. I'm just assuming, because I don't hear it randomly on the streets as much, that it's not used as normally.
I'll use it like sarcastically.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
I say it on Halloween a lot.
Same thing. Completely the same thing.
See, I thought that was funny.
That is because you have 4 children.
I'll be here all night.
So you can see how, like, with language, it kind of happens naturally, like almost a shift from word to word, situation to situation. That's why we have no idea what the people in the generations behind us are ever saying. We were talking about it before we started recording, how, did we do this too? And absolutely. Like, the first time someone said something was tight, I guarantee, like, the vein in my dad's head was just popping out. Like, what's tight? Like, probably thought we were probably thought we were being inappropriate or something, but didn't know how. You know what I mean? Like, what's being said here? So it's all generations, and all generations are going to think the one before them was silly for the things they said, and the one after them is silly for the things that they are now saying. And so, I don't know. I think we should just start randomly picking out ones we like just to throw people off. Like, let's bring back groovy, but in a non-ironic form. You know what I mean? Like,
oh yeah,
I'm gonna call dibs on G Willikers.
I have a feeling you've said that more than just right now recently. So, holy rusted metal Batman.
I say bet a lot. My kids say, "Oh, bet," and they don't like it when I use it.
So
I usually use it when, like, they have to clean their room. I'm like, "Oh, bet it's gonna be awesome."
Yeah, that's probably why you've paired it with something negative. But I had friends back in the early 2000s that were saying bet, and so I don't know. I feel like that one isn't one that we shouldn't be able to use, but it never seemed right coming from me, even back in those days.
Yeah.
What about that one person we knew who called everybody guy?
Yeah, the guy is kind of like, no, that's just your thing. You know what I mean?
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Because that can fit, I think, in any time period, as long as it's your thing and it sounds natural coming from you. But nobody else can be the guy, and it's still going to get on people's nerves probably at some point.
I've tried it. It doesn't work for me. I'm definitely not the guy.
And like, I remember it not being aversive hearing, but I'm sure some people were just driven completely crazy by it, So, all right, let's talk about inventions. So this is how language works. You can kind of see how it shifts. How do these kind of fit into this idea of coming up with new things, new topics, new ideas that have never occurred before? Especially, we'll get into this a little bit later, but oftentimes to the rest of society, it just seems like they come out of nowhere. This person's a genius. Where did it come from? So let's look at like batteries. The battery technology, especially recently with this idea, we have to find sustainable energy. Eventually oil reserves will run low. It's damaged in the environment. Electric cars, basically they always knew that in order to use stored energy, you had to have electrons running from one electrode to another through an electrolyte. That technology has been around for an extremely long time. There's even some suggestion that like the ancient Egyptians may have understood it because they had clay pots with seemingly having electrodes being connected. I don't know if that's really true, if that was just a Mythbusters thing, but at least on Mythbusters, they tested the technology to see if it worked, and it did have a low frequency.
I would like it to be true.
I think it was less than like the 9 volt on the tongue type thing. So it was a great episode, though. They ended up shocking somebody with a much more modern setup, and it's worth seeing.
Nice.
But it's not like now they've had to reinvent batteries. They've just taken this repertoire that they have of what makes a battery work, learned more about new materials and new setups, and just slowly shifted the technology by trial and error and maybe some computer models to find new electrolytes, new electrode materials, different ways of storing it, solid state battery versus a liquid electrolyte. And now, my Lucid can go over 500 miles and under the right conditions, compared to 10 years ago, like 300 miles, 250 miles in an electric car was considered good. It was pretty shocking that we'd even reached that point. Before that, it was just around town. And I mean, some of the first cars were actually electric cars back in the 1800s, but the range was so poor that they never took off. And so it is not like we are inventing new batteries necessarily, but we are taking our repertoire and due to this generalization that we have learned, applying new responses, or taking stimuli in one situation and shifting it slightly and applying that knowledge into a new situation, that now all of a sudden we can create something that seems brand new. I was also reading a meme the other day, and so you don't know exactly how accurate it is, but I know the microwave oven was invented supposedly by a gentleman working on radar systems during World War II, and he just noticed his candy bar was melting. And so same technology generalized to new stimuli and new situation, you follow it down the rabbit hole, and all of a sudden you've got a new form of cooking that had never been used before. It's not like we invented radiation. We just slowly tested new theories, new ideas, and came up with new technology. And that's really what I'm getting at with there not being any such thing as invention. Is sure, that is a new invention, but you're not just coming up with some new idea. You're just applying old ideas in new ways.
I didn't realize that electric cars were some of the first cars ever made. I'm looking at it now.
Yeah, I was surprised.
1828.
I was pretty surprised when I read that the first time. And the fact that they didn't come on or take off makes sense because of the technology, but also the fact that it took us this long to decide to really jump down and follow that technology, how far it can go, is interesting as well. So even like Einstein's theories, I mean, they seem, I don't know, out there, like to the extent where you can't even imagine where this idea came from. It's fantastical. Even it almost seems like something that should be in a magic, like a movie about magic, rather than scientific theory, because it is so beyond what most of us understand. But the theory didn't just come to him. He was trying to generalize the principle of inertial motions to that of accelerated motion to test and see if he could come up with why is it that acceleration seems to mimic gravity. And he was struggling with it. He just couldn't find like a theorem to fit it. But after talking to some colleagues, mathematicians, he turned to the mathematics of the curvature, and with the help of a mathematician friend named Marcel Grossman, I assume they're friends. They may have just been walking down the street and talking one day and actually hated each other's guts, but we'll pretend for the sake of the picture we're painting that they were good friends hanging out over a beer when they figured this out. That using, and I'm saying this, they obviously didn't, but both convergent and divergent multiple control and the combination of their repertoires, they came up with this new theory that ended up becoming his theory of general relativity. And so it is not that Hoover came out of nowhere, but he took his repertoire, applied a new repertoire, and slowly over time developed this. And I'm going to look up real quick just for people, if anybody's interested in a little bit more deep dive into this process. There was a professor at Penn, and I think I found it was actually his notes for his class that he was teaching rather than something he published, named John Norton. And he's part of the history Department of History and Philosophy of Science. And it was really cool just going down that rabbit hole and learning how Einstein came up with this theory. And it wasn't just this guy is such a genius, it just poof comes out of nowhere, but you can almost see as you're reading it the pathways he had to go down, and basically generalizing his repertoire and someone else's repertoire together to form this new theory.
Yeah, there's a really good is it This American Life? There's a really good NPR story, and I just looked it up about like the journey of Einstein's brain after he died, and they did do a dive into it. There were some like physiological like features of his brain that would like suggest he was more susceptible to learning quicker, or like some portion of his genius would be attributable to like his brain. But then a lot of talk about just like he surrounded himself with this stuff every day too, like even the sci-fi books that he was really interested in reading, some of them even I forget the whole story, but one was like about like basically the theory of relativity, or like understanding the world in the way in which he did. I'll look it up. I'll put it in the show notes because I'm botching it right now, but it's really interesting.
And I think you always have to be careful with like the brain studies after death too, because you never know the chicken or the egg, you know.
Oh yeah.
Actually,
yeah.
we do know that the egg came before the chicken. We can talk about that some other time. But
metaphorically,
you don't know, was his brain different because of his learning history? Because we know neurological pathways are actually formed during learning, or was it that his brain was different and that's why he was able to learn the way he did? It's almost like.
Sorry, go ahead.
What were you going to say?
The book that he read was about a guy writing to himself, but he was viewing past Earth because he was so far away, and so the history hadn't like caught up to him yet. So he was writing himself on Earth because he was in both places at once, essentially.
That's what Einstein was reading when he decided to jump down that rabbit hole.
That's what the book was about. It proved me wrong. Somebody might know more about this than me, so tell me if I'm wrong. But
it's interesting too, because it can, that those ideas of the aha moment, but then you still have to have this previous repertoire to even get there. You never know what that might be. And it almost reminds me of nowadays where you have a lot of people talking about the use of psychedelic drugs and their effects on their thinking. And we won't dive too much into that. And I'm not going to tell people that it's a good idea to use some of these things, because I've also had clients who, took acid or mushrooms and were never quite the same again after that. But there is a potential there that it helps you potentially think outside the box that you normally would think it, because you've had these new experiences that way. And there's also idea that it creates not necessarily, I guess maybe even abnormal pathways in the brain from those connections that, okay, this wouldn't have ever occurred had you not had this experience. And maybe that explains why sometimes those connections lead to schizophrenia, and sometimes they lead to you being a genius or something. You never know.
We should do an episode where we all just like microdose and then come up with new ideas together.
I will never admit to whether or not I've partaken in all these examples, but I will say that a bad experience in my youth prevents me from using most mind-altering substances at this point. I will have a beer or 5, but that is about as far as I will take it, just because the paranoia may or may not come back at any given time. I'm sure Chad's never touched this stuff in his life.
Not once. I do have a question on this topic though.
Yeah.
So are you alluding to or stating that there is no like true invention because it's essentially an adaptation of something that already was there?
Yes, you are either taking your repertoire and expounding into a new situation that nobody has ever done it before, or you're just slightly tweaking that behavior in that repertoire so it looks completely different to society, but to you followed a logical pathway to get to this new place. And so when others are looking in, they're like, oh wow, that's amazing, that came out of nowhere. But to you, usually most of the time, there's a logical pathway. And what's interesting is it's really still selected by the environment. And we can give an example, theoretical example in a minute. I use the movie A Beautiful Mind, but the farther that you've contrived this from the original, the more society is going to give you attention for being a genius, for coming up with something so new that they can't even figure out, even though it's just because it's a larger generalization, which is in theory a breakdown of the original contingency that you learned. You know what I mean? Like, and sometimes these generalizations are ineffective. They negatively affect your behavior because they don't achieve the outcome that you're looking for anymore. You have to either go back to what you were doing or find a new pathway altogether. But in these cases, it's like, no, you've basically broken down what was taught to you in such a way that it's more effective, or effective in a new way that we've never seen it before. And the larger that leap, the more genius you appear to be to everyone else. So going down that, thinking about the movie A Beautiful Mind, if not everybody knows, John Nash was a real person. He won the Nobel Prize. He had a diagnosis of schizophrenia, but the movie is completely fictional for the most part. The delusions he had weren't his real delusions. They didn't even really portray his actual equilibrium that well in the movie, but it's still a good movie. And the moment where he comes up with his equilibrium, he's sitting in the bar with some friends, a group of women walk in, they're all attracted to the one in the center, and they're discussing, who has the best chance, how are they going to go in there, and try to get her attention. And because of the environment, he could have selected almost any behavior. He could have played pool. He could have talked to his colleagues. They weren't really friends. He could have gotten an argument with his main rival who was there talking to him. Could have just decided to drink his beer and be quiet, play some billiards, whatever it was. But because of the situation, she walked in the room. He's talking to these gentlemen. They're all talking about this. He comes up with this idea that basically, if we all go after the one person that we're all more attracted to, then our competition will prevent any of us from being successful. But if we all go basically and agree to go separate directions with our attempts, then we're all likely to be successful. And I understand it's misogynistic as hell. And if you look at it from today's lens, it's really not a good thing. But supposedly this led him to this idea of this equilibrium that was in the face of prior, I guess, models of competition. And it was used mostly in economics, I believe. At least that's how they talked about it in the book, or in the movie, I mean. And so you can see, like, all these different things were available to him. All these different things were going on in the environment that he was having to select between. If you really break it down, like I did in my paper, motivating operations was probably higher from one behavior than another. I'm sorry, I'm going back to that last conversation we had. There was different discriminative stimuli in place. All these variables were pulling him in many different directions of which behavior should occur. His history of punishment, because in the movie he shows every time you try to talk to him and he'd get slapped or a beer poured on his head or something like that, because he was so socially awkward, punished the idea of actually going and trying to talk to the woman. It was all these things combined brought him to this aha moment where he came up with his idea and just like ran out of the bar to go write it down, basically. And so I use it for an example because it's one of the few times you can actually see potentially how these things can kind of come out of nowhere. It's even to the inventor, maybe it seems like it came out of nowhere, but it is all these repertoires intercombined based in just the perfect environment that is strengthening and selecting just the correct behavior in a gradient type fashion that all of a sudden brings you to this moment of like, I've just had this idea and I've got to go follow it now. See you guys later, sort of thing.
So is it possible then to create a system to help a human put themselves into the perfect environment so that aha moment, or plural, can happen for an everyday person? Not everybody's going to have this huge scientific breakthrough because that's just not what we understand. But maybe in their own life, starting a business, they've read this book, watched a podcast, watched an episode of something, and have learned how to construct an environment to where these aha moments occur most often. Like, is there a way to create that?
There is, and I guess there is, but it's complex. It'd be very hard to do. So if you were to take a young person, I say young just because the amount of time it could take, and put them in a class once per day where they basically honed and taught this ability to generalize stimuli and their own behavioral repertoires and the responses themselves in a way that was productive. Like, all right, this from this, these are logical, they make sense, and therefore I'm reinforcing this new repertoire of just expounding on what the knowledge I already have. Most people have to learn how to do that naturally and with some luck, really, you know what I mean? But if you could actually teach that because you have enough time with the person to spend teaching that, then in theory you could hone that, and you never know what they may come up with, and it may be effective and may not. But in theory, you could give them a much better chance of coming up with new inventions and new ideas that we would have never thought of before, just by submersing them in this environment that reinforces that, compared to that of, learning how to do math problems or talking to their friends like we usually, achieve most reinforcement in school nowadays.
Yeah, like this distraction, like there would have to be like an underlying MO too, of like attaining reinforcement through those discoveries too. Because like even you can surround me with books all day, but if I've got competing contingencies at play that require more immediate attention, I'm probably not going to read those books and thus apply any of that knowledge that I would have gained.
And also, because you're basically teaching creativity, the ineffective or even negative effects of that creativity could, hinder as well. Supposedly, Nikola Tesla came up with the idea of his induction motor while just talking to himself and talking to a friend walking in a park. And like it supposedly just came to him. But we also know that what gave him the ability to invent also potentially, or at least seemingly, had effects of him exhibiting signs of what might be considered schizophrenia nowadays. So you may end up with these ideas that are off the wall and don't fit society's norms or anything, while also shaping something that could be inventive and world changing. And so you never know what level or which way that creativity might go, and how dark it could turn if they perseverate and sit there and just think about this sort of thing all day, every day. I think that's why you get a lot of times, I know I mentioned it before, that the Nobel disease, where all these geniuses end up getting an idea also that doesn't fit what we know. It may be supernatural or it doesn't fit scientific knowledge, but because they've got so much reinforcement for being so smart, they will take that idea and run with it and start saying some really off the wall things because of that history as well. So. All right,
Yep.
Chad, what do you think? Did we say that in a way that people might actually understand?
Yeah, well, and listen, it got me thinking about like, okay, what's the everyday person simplistic version of that? And to me, it's where do your best thoughts come, and then can you recreate that environment? So let's say somebody says, my best ideas come to me while I'm in the shower. Okay, well, now you know how to recreate that environment to put what your brain and body is the best environment to start doing those things, but then take it a step further, either document, challenge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd say that's a real good piece of advice, is using what you have. You may want to shift, that environment, because you could slowly pair that with another thing, and move it to somewhere we'd be a little less pruny. And also, it may be very specific to the behavior itself. So this is only one topic I really have thought well in the shower. And so that's the topic I'm going to keep coming back to while I'm in the shower versus this other situation. And so
True.
you could potentially lock yourself just into one area if it truly was a pairing type thing. But that is kind of what we're talking about, is just how the environment itself can lead you to think of things that you've never thought of before, and the importance of that.
I'll tell you, the tires on Hummers where they go like this and they kind of turn.
Yeah.
I invented that when I was 7. Obviously, the military had it way before then, but my brain came up with that concept as related to farming. It wasn't brand new to the world, but it was brand new to me without, at least from what I can call, any particular stimulus saying this exists and it's kind of cool. My brain said, what if? And then your tractors could go in tighter corners.
But I'm sure that came about because you saw tractors turning a certain way, and different repertoires coming together with, like, why don't our back wheels ever turn like the front wheels? Oh, that could have fit this situation. And it didn't just
for sure
magically come out of nowhere.
Right.
Like
to me, it was a brand new invention, but I'm sure if we could record, it would be traceable to something that.
And not only that, the fact that others came up with the same invention leads that there's probably a fairly logical pathway that gets a lot of people to that same invention as well. So
that happens a lot in like stand-up comedy, and even in like the music world, where like jokes or like licks or melodies or something get like lifted from a previous work, but the person who is doing the stealing doesn't even know that they stole that or did something that similar, or they might make something that's like very adjacent, similar to that concept, but it's already been made. They've just been exposed to it at some point or another, or it's completely random. But more than likely, they probably heard it and it's floating around somewhere up there, and they come up with it as their own later on.
All right, I know.
Yep.
Chad's running out. We're out of time as Chad needs to get his ears lowered here. So, any other thoughts or anything before I say my ending here?
No, I had my initial thought when I pushed back on one challenge question that there's no such thing, because my brain went to the wheel. Like there was a time when humans didn't conceive or even think about rolling stuff to move, but that doesn't mean that the environment of a coconut falling and rolling and somebody saying, oh, that's kind of a cool shape, this might be utilizable, wasn't what influenced that.
Or it could have even been you were sitting something on a block and the edge of the block got chipped and then it rolled a little bit. Like you don't know what environmental stimuli basically set that off in motion, but there had to have been something at some point that did.
Yeah.
So
that was my only challenging curiosity.
And again, obviously invention is real. It's just more about coming out of nowhere doesn't seem to be real. There's always a scientific explanation of where it must have come from or originated at some point. So
yeah, you explained it great. I mean, it brought me back full circle, and I kind of figured it out for myself. So hopefully the listeners also came to that conclusion and are not going to just be taking a bunch of showers to create new ideas.
Cold showers. So all right then, if no other ideas, we'll end on this. Just be out there inventing things, enjoying life, and really try to take the time to enjoy the little things, because you never know when going down the rabbit hole in that next invention may cause some schizophrenia and set you off the wall, and you'll never come back to reality again. So be careful out there, but enjoy it while you can.
You never know when that's going to happen.
That happens to me regularly.